Hey, everybody, welcome to the Elevation Association podcast. My name is Dr. Jared Hill, and I am your host today with my co-host Ryan Passey from the Elevation Association. Dr. Dan Nelson is out of town today. We'll miss him, but we are excited for this episode today. Ryan, good morning. How are we doing?
Good. I'm doing good. Finally getting some spring weather up here, so doing good.
Yeah, it's beautiful outside. Excited for this podcast, Ryan. We've got a series of podcasts we're going to do on KPIs or key performance indicators. And this morning's podcast is just an introduction of why those are important. So this is an overview that's going to break down essential KPIs that every dentist is going to need, that they should be tracking. We're going to talk about why they matter, how to optimize them for growth and efficiency, and hopefully we'll give a few, real world study cases, some insights, and maybe even some strategies on how to use these things. Um, so this is good. I'm excited. We're going to talk first about why data-driven dentistry matters. Ryan, what do you see as far as data-driven dentistry? You work with offices on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and what do you see typically when you discuss data-driven dentistry?
That's an interesting question. A lot of times when we start working with offices, what we find is most offices are using, gut feelings or speculation on how things are going in the office, and they're not really tapping into the KPIs very well. And so it's kind of an interesting process to start working with dental practices and implementing some KPIs on like a weekly, daily, weekly, monthly um, process. So what I find is like the docs at first are a little overwhelmed with all of the KPIs and what we can pull from dental practices. But the fun thing is once they kind of get in and start learning the data, they immediately become like data nerds and start really getting into the data and doing a good job of like making decisions based on the information as opposed to like a gut feeling. So it's kind of fun because even like, with you and Dan, when we started here, KPIs was kind of like, oh, what's a KPI? But you guys are probably as big a data nerds as I am at this point, understanding the data, what it's telling you, and how to make decisions based on that. So for me, it's fun because again, docs are typically very analytic, very they're just not looking at the numbers or understanding or knowing what to look at. So what I find is like once we start getting into it, like light bulbs go off and um, docs are up and running pretty quick just because their natural ability to analyze, diagnose, and make decisions based on information. So
Yeah, what's interesting, Ryan, is I spent most of my the beginnings of my career making a lot of emotionally based decisions. And I honestly think that's one of the biggest factors that led to my burnout early on in my career. Because when you're a clinician, you have to run the business as well. So you wear multiple hats, right? You're a clinician, you're a CEO, you're HR manager, you're a marketer, you're a financial strategist, you're all of these things. And there's a lot of pressure to hit these production goals. And so you're overwhelmed by a lot of the responsibilities that you have. And like you said, dentistry demands precision. So that clinically speaking, even these small errors can have big consequences. So we're driven, or we are geared to understand precision and make decisions based upon these small decisions, but we don't know necessarily how to do this in regards to the data and making these data-driven decisions with KPIs. And I think the biggest thing that leads to burnout is without knowing your KPIs or without knowing your data or your numbers, you end up working harder instead of working smarter. Because without KPIs, really, you don't know what's working. You don't know what's broken. So what do? You just keep grinding. You add more hours, you see more patients, you hope it fixes something. You think you can work yourself out of these situations. But what is the result? The result's overwork, it's exhaustion, and really without progress. It's because you don't really understand what you're working on. So you lose sight of a lot of these things. you feel a little bit out of control without knowing your KPIs. So I think that's a big deal for tracking KPIs and how that can reduce stress in your life as a practitioner, because these numbers actually give you clarity. I really feel like they give you direction and they reduce anxiety, they reduce fatigue, as opposed to at first they seem overwhelming and at first they may seem like they're adding anxiety to you, but in actuality, it's the opposite. You focus on the right things instead of focusing on the wrong things. And now all of a sudden your team is engaged, because when your team is not engaged, when you're not tracking KPIs, there's no scoreboards, there's no accountability, there's a lack of progress, and that equals to more stress on you, really is what it turns out to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be so emotionally draining too, because it's all emotionally based in a lot of ways, right? You're just kind of throwing things against the wall and hoping something sticks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's can lead to, yeah, like you said, it can lead to burnout, I think, pretty easily, because you're just kind of spinning your wheels, not sure if you're making progress. And if you're not tracking how well you're doing on something, you're not going to know whether you're moving things forward or not. So making sure you have the tools and the things in place to, like, make good decisions, be able to track like progress on a decision. And like, it's so helpful for a doc to be able to see what's going on. Just like when you're working with patients, you've got tools and stuff to diagnose and give the patient the proper treatment so that they heal and make improvements. Like, it's the same thing with your business. You just got to know exactly what you're looking at and be able to measure progress when it's happening, right?
Absolutely. One of the biggest hurdles that I had is once I understood the importance of KPIs, and that concept was introduced to me, and I got over the anxiety of actually of deciding to dive deep into it. I didn't necessarily know where to get I didn't know what the KPIs were, and I didn't know what they were. I didn't know how to analyze them, and then I didn't know how to use them necessarily until about 20, I can't remember what year it was, 2015, 20 or so, where I finally found Dental Intel, which is a company where you can start to track all of your KPIs. It's a software system, and there are several of them out there. This is just one that I came across and one that I've ended up liking and one that we like as well here at Elevation Association. But they will pull all of your data from your operating system, your EagleSoft, your Dentrix, or Open Dental, or whatever you're using. Almost anything. There are some exceptions. We won't get into that, right? But there's some exceptions. But it will pull that data and it will provide you your KPIs, and it'll put them in the form of a dashboard, and you can look at them, and it'll give you the data or information that now you need to try to understand, analyze it, and then make changes and implement changes based upon the understanding of the data and the consequences of what that data is telling you. So we use that, right? You use that on a daily basis.
Yeah, we use Dental Intel with our practice here, and then again with the practices that we work with. And it's such a powerful tool. Again, being able to look at your analytics in a dashboard that's like easy to comprehend, easy to understand. The information's right there at your fingertips. But it's super important, because a lot of times, like, even when we come in and do a growth report, or if you have a supplier or something do a practice analysis for you, they give you kind of a snapshot of where your practice is, which is kind of like a map of, like, okay, here's where I'm at. But like, Dental Intel is more of like a GPS system. So now I know where I'm at, but I can also track if I'm making progress. And that's really what you want, is something that can help you not just know where you're currently sitting, but like can help you recognize when you're making progress. And you can track that in a way of, like, okay, last week my reappointment percentage was 82, and this week it's 90. Like, you're making progress when on a week to week basis you can see like where you're going. And then you can also see, like, okay, which 10% of my patients did I not reappoint? And you've got some actionable, you know, data to then go follow up, either with your team or follow up with the patients to make sure we're getting them rescheduled back in. But like, not just knowing like I have an issue, but having the data to then be like, okay, now I know what decisions need to be made based off this information that I've got. So, having um, a system like Dental Intel is super important, just again to like not only tell you where you're at, but how you're making progress every day. So
Yeah. No, and so now, and once you have that information, once you have that system, whether it be Dental Intel or somebody else, and you have the dashboard in front of you, Ryan, let's take a few minutes. Let's go over, the typical 14 KPIs that we consider maybe the strongest KPIs for growth within a practice, ones that you should be monitoring maybe on a weekly basis or maybe a monthly basis. And we'll just give a quick overview on this podcast, and then we'll dive deeper into each one of those in later series or later podcasts in this series. But we can even break it down into KPIs per section of your practice. So there are certain KPIs for your front office, there's certain KPIs for your hygiene department, and then certain KPIs for the restorative department as well. So let's break it down that way. And we've got some KPIs. Ryan, in our practice, you work in our accountability chart. You work with the front office, and there's certain KPIs that you like to view and utilize with them. Would you mind just going over those with on a brief overview and maybe how we use them in whatever?
sure, we when working with the front office, we go over a lot of data every week. Some of the main ones when we work with practices are like the pre-appointment percentage is pretty important. And this is a little different than like the reappointment percentage. The pre-appointment percentage is the percentage of active patients at your practice who currently have a future appointment. So one of the things we're wanting to always increase with reappointment is pre-appointment. So that average number of patients that we have, like how many of those currently have a future appointment. So, and this is one of the, benchmark KPIs that Dental Intel uses when we do a growth report. These 14 KPIs that we go over are on that growth report. And so, a healthy practice is, towards 65%. That's where you'd want to be, is like 65% of my active patient base has a future appointment coming up on the schedule. And so this, means you're doing a good job reappointing. Your schedule should be filling up to a good extent, and you can see how many future appointments you've got coming down. New patient reappointment is the next metric that we look at. So this is an interesting one because this is new patient comes to your office. When they leave with a hygiene appointment, not just a restorative or no appointment. But what's the percent of we finally attracted new patient into our office. When they leave, do they leave already enrolled in our ReCare program? And so this is a pretty important metric. So every week we look at, here's the number of new patients we have and what's their next appointment. Did they get enrolled into the hygiene program? Are they coming up for a doc? Or are they coming for a consult? Or is it an emergency patient we're never going to see again? But making sure we look at each one of those patients every week, because you spend so much time and money marketing, trying to get a new patient in the door. Are we doing a good job at like making sure that patient then is enrolled back into that hygiene department? So
Yeah, it's going to be fun to dive deeper into this one in a future episode because I didn't understand the value of this initially when I first saw it. So looking forward to doing that one.
yeah, that one's a good one. Patient growth rate's another one that kind of goes hand in hand with this one as well. So making sure we're tracking not just new patients coming into the practice, but how many patients we recaptured that were previous active patients in the practice, and then how many patients we lost. So in Dental Intel, an active patient is defined as a patient that we've seen in the last 18 months at the practice. So we want to make sure we're tracking those active patients. Most practices do a good job of tracking new patients, but what they don't do a good job of is tracking lost patients. The ones that Now it's been 18 months since we've seen them. So tracking your growth rates really important, but making sure you're seeing the whole picture, not just how many new patients am I getting, but also how many patients am I losing, and how many patients am I reacquiring back into the practice. So
Yeah, and what's interesting is the average national patient growth rate is 4%. It's an average. The bottom 10% is a negative growth rate, which is they're still getting maybe new patients, but they're losing more patients. This is also another fun one to dive into, and Dan has a lot of information on this as far as marketing goes and the costs of marketing and acquiring new patients versus retaining new patients. So this is going to be a fun, long episode at some point in time as well.
and each practice is different. Some are in the growth phase, will really want to push growth numbers, and some are like, I just want to maintain a healthy patient base. But
Mhm.
just being aware of the data, because the data is going to support your goal, whatever your goal is. But you have to make sure you're looking at that data every week, right? Make that.
Right. Yep. Good.
Uh,
What else? There's a
and
couple
that
more
was,
in the front
yeah,
office.
annual patient value. So this one is like, what's an average patient worth to your practice in a year? So this is an important one to make sure that you're tracking on a weekly basis. And again, these fluctuate between insurance companies and everything else, the average value of each insurance company. But overall, what is the average value of each patient at your practice? And is that increasing? Is that decreasing? Where are you headed with that? And then obviously we look at collections, percentage of net collections of the last 90 days. Want to be at 100% net collections over the last 90 days. So it's kind of the goal for those. So
Yeah, the annual patient value, we've got quite a few stories and clinical examples or practice examples. I don't know if they're clinical practice examples of how to use the annual patient value to make decisions moving forward. So, and that'll be a good podcast as
yeah,
well.
in fact, I think this one was one that was presented as the absolute top KPI of
Yeah,
all.
good point. Yeah, when Dental Intel rated their top 5 KPIs, this was actually the number one most important KPI, which is it's good. So all those, Ryan, all those are monitored by front office. Is that how you work? Okay.
Yeah, so these are the kind of the main ones we focus on at the front office. So yeah, why don't
And
you delve into the hygiene ones? So.
yeah, so in our office we divide the responsibilities, obviously divide and conquer, delegate to elevate. As a practice owner, I would highly recommend doing this. So we have Ryan, who's in charge of our front office, and he meets with all the front office staff, meaning we've got one financial coordinator, one front office, and she also is front office, a hygiene coordinator, front office. Then we have a treatment coordinator, and then there's Ryan. That's our front office team, right, Ryan? Okay. And then we amongst those 4 people, we divide these KPIs and those people help track that. So I'm in charge of the hygiene department. So I meet with our hygiene team leader. She's on our leadership team, and then I meet with the other hygienists, and we cover these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We cover these 6 KPIs. The first one being the hygiene pre-appointment percentage, which just means how many of your hygiene patients have an appointment. You know, the average nationwide is 62%. And the top 10% is like 77%. So um, that's an important KPI to monitor. The one that goes along with that is the hygiene reappointment percentage. And the difference between those two is the hygiene pre-appointment, which is how many of your patients have a future hygiene appointment, period. The hygiene reappointment percentage is how many of them get reappointed after their appointment at the end of the day. So your hygiene reappointment percentage, national average is about 79%. At the top 10% is 91%. And the offices that are part of Elevation Association and us, we're hovering around more closer to 95, 96%. And even at Wood River here, we're this last couple months, we've been 98, 99%. So this is very doable. I think an interesting part of this KPI is every time we talk with an office, Everybody thinks they're doing this really well. Everybody feels like they're doing this really well. Um, and at the end of the podcast, Ryan, remind me we need to talk about those trigger words. Then we'll talk about
Feels like
what it means when people say it feels like or whatever. So there's a hygiene pre-appointment, hygiene reappointment, and then there is your perio percentage, which is a huge thing to monitor as well. Probably this one is also one of the top five KPIs identified by Dental Intel is your perio percentage, which means of your patients over 30 years old, what percentage of them should be in your perio program as a general dentist. The Centers for Disease Control, CDC, said about 47% of Americans have periodontal disease. The ADA is a little lower, 44%, maybe 45%. I'm not sure what the difference is, but that should go to reason that your perio percentage in your practice probably should be around there somewhere. The KPI is set at 30% because generally speaking, probably people who get have perio disease probably don't go get treatment very often. So they may not be actively seeking treatment, but the ones that are actively seeking treatment, generally speaking, about 30%. This was the biggest factor for us at Wood River Dental. This was the first thing that started our journey onto this KPI understanding and tracking and measuring because we got a business analysis from Burkhart and we'll talk more about this, but ours at first was 6%. It was pretty low. If not, it might have been a little lower, but it was embarrassing. And so we'll talk about that in a future podcast. The next one is your perio visit percentage. What is the difference there? So your perio patient percentage is how many patients within your patient base are involved in your perio program. Your perio visit percentage is what percent of your visits are perio, which means seal and replaning, perio maintenance, um, or limited SRP 1 to 3 teeth. So those are your perio visits. And national average is 18%. Your visits should be around 36%. Well, and then fluoride treatment. This was another one that was really low for us. We weren't focusing on it. We just didn't, not that we don't believe in fluoride because we do believe in fluoride. And that's a personal preference. You may or may not, and that's okay. But if you do believe in fluoride and if you think it's beneficial for your patients and patient base, then you probably should be around 31% as a national average. Top 10% of practices are 67%. And the last hygiene KPI that we review is the hygienist production per visit. So this is always a huge eye opener because Dental Intel and other software will allow you to evaluate each hygienist individually and then as a team. So as a team, the national average is $152 per visit. The top 10% is $209 per visit. And when you dive deep into this, you may see that one hygienist is producing 209, the other is producing $100, and that gives you an average of 152, 153. So it's interesting to start to recognize this. And I will tell you from personal experience that the hygienists want to know what they're doing. And as long as you are talking about this in the correct way about the benefit that it is for the patient, then the hygienist will appreciate you tracking this metric and number, and they enjoy our hygienists right now enjoy looking forward to it every week and reviewing it. So those are the KPIs that we'll dive deep into in future podcasts, each one of those. But those are your KPIs for your hygiene department. You should be measuring. We measure these on a weekly basis. And then we also look at a monthly, quarterly, of course, and then yearly. But these we look at every one of these on a weekly basis.
it's super important. And one of the interesting things of the office is that it's not like every week you're um, dictating these metrics to the hygiene team. Like they're in charge of their own metrics as well. Like everyone's got a metric that they're in charge of and they're responsible for, and so they're also contributing to that metric being measured and tracked and doing a good job with that, right?
Yeah, there's magic when you get the hygienist in a room and you bring up everybody's numbers. You bring up all of their hygiene, especially the hygiene production per visit. and you see that three of the four of them produced, over $200 per visit, and one of them was at 150, it's not a shaming moment, even though the hygienist may feel shame at that moment. It's more like, hey, what happened? What can we do different? Why, it's simply, let's figure this out together and let's talk about it. And now that hygienist is focusing on not missing the X. Maybe as simply as not missing the X-rays. Maybe simply as not offering the fluoride. Maybe it's almost always a very simple fix. This is almost always a very easy number to get back up to where it should be.
Right, when we start doing this too, sometimes it's a data entry problem. It's not
Yeah,
necessarily
right.
a production thing. It's you find other issues in the practice that are going on. Things aren't getting walked out correctly. Things are getting missed. Things aren't getting tracked the way they should, so
Yeah,
measuring that every week is super important, so.
totally.
So just a few other metrics to hit on the dentist side of things. Again, the dentist production per visit is super important. Again, that annual value, patient value, but how much is each visit, worth to the doc? How much are you producing every time you're in the chair? So, and this is in addition of like the types of procedures you're doing, pricing, all of those things contribute to like your production per visit. So again, this is something we track with our docs every week and want to make sure they're producing well. And again, if something's off, then we can like dig into the data a little bit more and try to figure out like why is your production per visit low? Is your pricing low? Are you doing the wrong procedures? Are you doing way more fillings and crowns? What's the is your scheduling off? And start to look at that data a little bit. But again, that's an important one. An average doc produce about 460 per visit. Top 10 docs in the nation produce around 666 per visit. So you can kind of see where you rank there. The other thing we look at is treatment presented. Like how much treatment are you presenting on an average to each patient? And of that treatment that gets presented, how much are you getting scheduled? So those are the other two things we really look at are average treatment presented and treatment acceptance. And some interesting ones on this is sometimes when we work with an office, you'll find that maybe they're under diagnosing and then they're scheduling almost 100% of that because they're not diagnosing enough. Or some you'll find that they're way over diagnosing and not doing a very good job of like getting those things scheduled. And what's cool in this metric too is you can not only see it again, what is the overall percentage, but then you can dive into it and see like when Dr. Hill works with Shayla, they present really well and they have a great scheduling percentage, right? They get a lot of the work like presented scheduled. Like she does a great job setting them up and they're able to schedule a lot of treatments. So
Yeah. And it was interesting reviewing that. I review that with a hygienist on a weekly basis as well. And sometimes I will look at and I'll wonder why didn't we not schedule a lot of treatment last week? And then I'll actually go in and look at the hygiene team and I'll say, wow, of all the exams I did last week in Shayla's room, I only proposed $1,300 worth of treatment all week or less. Sometimes it's less. And it's an eye opener to me as a practitioner. Oh man, I have to be more diligent in my exams and diagnose more. This is not a hygienist problem. This is not a treatment coordinator problem. This is a doctor problem. And that's one way to use some of that data to analyze it and then make information. But that's a very powerful metric, a KPI to measure as well.
absolutely. What's cool is you can get in and see like patient by patient, what was presented, what got scheduled, what's still out there pending, and
Mhm.
kind of really get into the data on those things, which is fun. So.
You know what? Let's talk for 1 second, Ryan. What are some of the key phrases that you hear when we first start to talk to practices about using data? What are some of the things that are very typical that dentists will say?
So yeah, you hear some of these trigger words all the time when you know that they're using gut feelings instead of like data. Uh, and a lot of times you'll see, it feels like we're reappointing everyone. Or
Mhm.
you'll even get absolutes where it's like, we reappoint everyone, like,
Mhm.
we don't miss anything. You'll hear that, so, um, feels like, seems like, again, we always, anytime you're hearing those kind of phrases or words, you should take a pause and like, okay, what does that really mean? Like, or, a lot of the times we'll hear like, oh, this happens all the time in the office. Well, what does that mean? Like, it happens all the time. And
Mhm.
so taking a moment to then, anytime you're hearing any of those trigger words, that should be a red flag to like, let's look at the data. Let's get into this a little bit um, more, and let's, because again, the gut feelings are probably good indicators that there's either an issue or thing, but like you just want to use the data to verify or validate the gut feeling.
Sure.
Anytime someone's telling you those trigger words, take pause, go get some more data and really look at it, because otherwise you're going to make a decision based on that assumption. And then again, you might be spinning your wheels, or that thought or feeling might be completely different. That was one when we got here and started looking at reappointment. We reappoint everyone, was the
Quote unquote, we reappoint everyone. Literally,
reappoint.
exactly what they said.
And then the data showed we reappoint about 72%. So
Yeah.
like, not everyone. So, and then, so it's, yeah, anytime you're hearing those trigger words, take pause, go dive into the data a little bit and get some help. So,
I think it's important to note that the KPIs, you may not need major tweaks. You may be looking at the KPI and see that you're doing pretty good. You may be reappointing 80%, 85% of your hygiene appointments. But with small tweaks and very little effort, you can be reappointing 90%, 95%, which is, that's maybe only a patient or two every day, depends on how many you see. But that adds up. Those small little things add up and they reduce the stress that you feel as a dentist. I also wanted just to note and say that one of the biggest frustrations I think as a dentist that I felt was isolation. Dentists, we work in silos. We don't really have a strong community sounding board. And so these feelings of uneasiness, loneliness, they did this disconnection that we feel is very detrimental to us. And that leads to burnout as well. Well, when you have these KPIs, when you have somebody to review these KPIs with, whether it be us or whether it be with your team or somebody else, you're reducing that isolation. You can say, okay, generally speaking, this is what nationwide other practices are doing. Okay, this is how I'm doing. And it gives you a great sense of relief. How many people contact us just because they want to know how they're doing? They don't have any idea how they're doing. And not that you need to, there's this fine line between comparing yourself with other people and living up to their standards. That's a completely different discussion. But if there's something majorly wrong that you need to fix, then this is a great way to do this. And as far as an actionable step, there's something that you guys, anybody listening to this, can do for free. Is you can contact us and we will send you a KPI sheet. We will send you this KPI report, and you can go in and you can fill out, you can pull the data and you can fill it out and see where you're at. And that's a great thing to do on your own or maybe with your leadership team or with somebody. And then I would start a weekly KPI review habit. Pick one, pick two. Hey, start off small. If you want to do this on your own, that's fine. Start off small and start to review these KPIs. We will include in our show notes maybe a little link for this KPI tracker, a way to contact us, and we will send that to you. And then happy to have any sort of discussion. We'll also, if you want to really dive into these KPIs and decide you want to start making a bunch of data-driven decisions, we're happy to do what's called a free growth report for you. We will help you pull all of this data and then review all of this with you in a meeting. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour, and we will go over step by step with you some actionable steps you can take for free. We do that because we think that's very valuable for every dentist, and we are here to help everybody out. So um, look for those show notes. Any last words, Ryan? Any parting thoughts you have?
no, I think I just double down on what you're saying. Like, if you're wanting to know how well you're doing, contact us. We can help take a look at the numbers. And sometimes, we've done a couple growth reports in the last couple of weeks that like just validate that the docs and the office is doing really well, not like there's any screaming problems, there's always areas where we can improve. But like sometimes it's a great validation to be like, hey, I'm doing good. We're on the right track. We're making good decisions. So again, we're here to help. Free growth report, doesn't cost anything. It's super easy, ton of great data. You can find out where you're sitting on these 14 top metrics against national averages, and you can also identify where there's potential growth for your practice. And Dan calls it coins in the couch cushion, where there's some money being left on the table. But again, looking for data to make good decisions, that's something we believe in here, and we're here to help. We do this all the time. We know which metrics to be looking at and can set these things up to work with practices pretty seamlessly. So shameless plug here, but
Yeah, no, it's if you like the podcast, please like, subscribe to us, and look forward to future episodes. Like I said before, we're gonna take each KPI and dive deep into it and give you an analysis of it. And so we'll be looking forward to that. To next week, we'll dive into our first KPI and we will roll with this series. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
yeah.